The storm arrived without thunder, just a relentless curtain of rain that made the city shiver. The streets turned into dark mirrors. Shop signs blurred into watercolor. My breath came out in ghosts. I wasn't running from anything, at least that's the lie I told myself when. I ducked beneath the awning of a closed florist and saw her, a girl painting the downpour as if each drop had a name. I didn't yet know the word Clara. I only knew the atmosphere around her felt like a secret about to confess itself. She balanced a sketchbook against her knee and stood at an angle. Body slightly curled like she could shelter something fragile inside her ribs. Rain misted her hair. Colors bled at the edges of her drawing. I opened my umbrella and stepped closer, offering the small sanctuary it made. She looked at it, then at me, and smiled gently, like someone who has learned that kindness can sometimes be a trap. "No, thank you," she said, and the rain clung to her lashes as if it loved her. I lowered the umbrella anyway, hovering it between us. "I'm not here to save you," I said, surprising even myself. "Just share the sky." She laughed, a careful sound that belonged in the palm of a hand, shifted into the half-circle of dry air with the shyness of a confession. Up close, I saw what she was doing. She wasn't painting buildings or faces. She was tracing the way water threads gather, fall, and vanish. Each stroke was a heartbeat. Each line tried to hold what can't be held. "You make the rain look alive," I said. She kept drawing. "It is," she answered. "It ruins things. It feeds things. It tests which colors bleed and which don't." I realized then that she was not merely recording the weather. She was interrogating it, like it was a witness to something only she and the sky understood. We talked because people are braver when water hides their faces. She asked what I did, and I told her the truth in a half-light way, that I used to paint. But I stopped, that sometimes silence is heavier than stone. "Silence is a kind of armor," she said, pencils scratching like rain on tin. "You look like you wear it well." I pretended to grin. She pretended to believe me. The city hummed behind the downpour, a heartbeat just out of rhythm. She asked me what I used to paint, and I told her hands mostly. Hands holding, hands letting go. The daily choreography of touch. She nodded as if I'd said something worth keeping. "Hands are where people tell the truth," she murmured. "Faces know how to lie." I noticed her fingers ink-stained, knuckles chapped from cold, moving in small, precise arcs, unafraid of smearing. It felt like watching someone read a letter from the future. A gust of wind shifted the rain. She stepped closer without thinking, and the umbrella suddenly belonged to both of us. I could feel the chill rising from her coat, the faint scent of wet wool and turpentine. "Do you paint anymore?" she asked, eyes on the street, voice careful as thread. "Not since last winter," I said. Something broke, looked up then, right into me. "Sometimes things don't break," she said softly. "Sometimes they're pried open." The words lodged in my chest like a small luminous thorn. A bus roared past, spraying the curb. She flinched and laughed again, the kind of laugh that asks for permission to exist. I noticed a folded brochure slip from her portfolio. On the damp pavement, the ink bled, but I could still make out a name stamped in gold. Valentine Gallery. She tucked it away quickly, almost guiltily, as though ambition were a letter she couldn't let anyone read. "Big dreams?" I asked. She shrugged. "Small work. Big rooms. That's the fantasy." She didn't say she deserved it. She didn't say she'd do anything for it. She didn't have to. Her eyes already had that distance the horizon kind. Time stretched itself thin between raindrops. She drew me then, quick lines under her breath, and I felt oddly exposed, like a window with no curtains. "Hold the umbrella higher," she murmured. "I want to see the space between us." I did what she asked. The space was narrow, but it felt like a road. "What's your name?" She hesitated, as if saying it out loud would bind us to something neither of us had decided on. "Clara," she said finally, and the rain set it back 1,000 times on concrete. When the storm softened to a hush, she tore a small rectangle from her sketchbook and pressed it into my palm. A quick graphite spell, me, tilted forward, the black arc of the umbrella curving over her like a vow. She'd drawn her own face in half shadow, not because she was hiding, but because she understood that every beginning needs a mystery. "Keep it," she said, "so you won't forget me when the sky clears." The paper was warm from her hands. I felt the tremor of something that hadn't yet learned its own name. I wanted to ask where she was going, if she had someone waiting, whether I could walk her to the corner where light returns to puddles like a promise. Instead, I noticed the blue scarf at her throat, rain dark and frayed. She unwound it and wrung it out, laughing, then wrapped it back with the practiced tenderness of someone who refuses to throw anything away. "Do you always paint storms?" I asked. "Only when I can't outpace them," she said, and there was a flash in her eyes that didn't belong to the weather. The florist's neon flickered alive behind us as the owner turned the sign to open, the sweetness of damp roses slipping into the air. She slid her pencils into their tin with tiny clicks that sounded like the end of something. "I should go," she whispered, as if speaking too loudly might wake whatever the rain had lulled to sleep. I nodded, though my chest tightened like a fist. "Will I see you again?" Escaped me before I could dress it as something safer. She glanced at the street, at the soft graying sky, at the umbrella we'd held like a fragile treaty. "If the weather allows," she said, and the words were kind and cruel in equal measure. She turned, lifted her portfolio, and stepped from the awning into a lacework of drizzle. I watched her cross the street, watched her look both ways, and still not see the world that would later call her brilliant and leave her empty. The brochure peeked from her bag again, gold letters catching a weak winter light. She didn't adjust it this time. She didn't need to. Some ambitions don't hide. They simply wait. When I finally looked down at the sketch in my hand, I noticed faint writing on the back, graphite ghosted by moisture. A name, a date, and what might have been a number smudged at the last digit. As if the rain couldn't decide whether to be generous or mean. I traced the blurred mark with my thumb and felt something inside me wake up like a room with a window thrown open. The storm had passed. The street shone. Yet even as the sky cleared, I stood there under the awning, holding a paper version of us that would outlast the weather, and wondering which of us would be the first to dissolve. Winter became our canvas. The world outside froze in shades of gray, but inside her apartment, our little cocoon of paint-stained floors and mismatched. Mug's warmth bloomed like something fragile and forbidden. The windows fogged from our laughter, the scent of turpentine and cinnamon tea lacing the air. Every night felt like a painting that refused to dry, colors bleeding. Hearts blurring, boundaries disappearing. Clara and I worked side by side, our silence punctuated by the soft scratch of brushes and the rhythm of rain against the glass. She'd hum sometimes, low and almost secret, a melody that never had words. I'd watch the way her hair slipped loose from its tie, the way her fingers trembled before each brushstroke, as if afraid of what honesty might look like once captured on canvas. "You make me feel seen," she once whispered, without looking up. The light caught on her cheekbone, pale gold. "Like you understand what I'm trying to say before I do." I smiled. "Maybe that's because you're saying it in colors I already know." She laughed softly, dipping her brush into blue. "Then maybe you're the only one who does." But I didn't see it then, that her words were less a confession and more a warning. She dreamed of gallery walls and camera flashes, of strangers clapping for something she'd built from silence. I dreamed smaller, of coffee cups, unmade beds, her hair tangled in mine on a Sunday morning. We were both chasing forever, just in different directions. Some nights, she'd lean against me, exhausted and alive, her voice trembling like candlelight. "Promise me you won't leave," she'd whisper, and every time I did. Because love to me was a vow. To her, it was a test. She painted me once, not my face, but my hands. "They're safe," she said, tracing my palm with the tip of her brush. "They hold without taking. They protect without caging." I thought it was love. But her eyes told another story. They were searching for something distant, something applause-shaped. Not warmth. Witness. The kind of gaze that validates rather than understands. One evening, I woke to find her standing by the window, her robe slipping from one shoulder, light from the street lamps painting her in fractured gold. She was holding one of her canvases, half finished. Trembling slightly, I sent a few pieces to a gallery in the city, she said quietly, almost apologetically. My chest tightened, though I didn't know why. That's good, I managed. You deserve to be seen. She nodded, but her smile didn't reach her eyes. They said my work feels... lonely. They're right, I said, stepping closer. But that's what makes it real. Her gaze flickered to mine, uncertain. What if loneliness sells better than love? I didn't have an answer, so I kissed her, slow, unsure, hoping it would silence the question. But she didn't kiss back. Not fully. Her lips moved, but her heart was elsewhere. Already measuring itself in spotlights and signatures, we began to change without noticing. Our laughter thinned. Our silence deepened. She started painting with her back turned toward me. I started sleeping later, pretending to read. She'd disappear for hours, returning with the scent of wine and something foreign. The kind of confidence that only comes from being praised by someone new. When I asked, she said, meetings, opportunities. You should be proud. I was. Or tried to be. I didn't know that opportunity had a name, Adrian. A curator. A man who promised her exhibitions and immortality. The same man who would one day stand beside her at the altar. Back then, I only knew that something between us had shifted, subtle as dust, but sharp as truth. The girl who once painted rain now painted light she couldn't reach, and I kept pretending I didn't notice the distance because I was still trying to believe in the version of us that used to exist. One night, she left a note on the table beside my mug. A sketch her, standing before a crowd, eyes wide, hands trembling. At the bottom, she'd written, "You once said I paint loneliness well. Maybe that's all I know how to love." The ink was still wet when I touched it, smudging into a blur. I stared at it for a long time, realizing it wasn't a confession. It was a goodbye written in disguise. Outside, the snow fell softly, unhurried, uncaring. I remember thinking how beautiful she looked when she was chasing something I couldn't give, and how terrifying it was to realize that sometimes love isn't about holding on. It's about learning when you've already been left behind. The night of her first exhibition felt like a dream I had once painted. Too bright, too perfect, too far from truth. The gallery glowed with soft gold light, the kind that flatters lies and hides the cracks beneath the frame. My hands were trembling as I held the bouquet of white lilies, her favorite symbols of purity and peace. I told myself it was pride, but somewhere deeper, quieter, was dread. Clara had always said she wanted this, a night where people saw her art, and through it, her soul. I believed her. I believed in her more than I believed in myself. So I stood there, anonymous, among the guests, a ghost dressed in black. Watching her move through the crowd like she'd been born for it, every step she took shimmered with the confidence she used to borrow from my heartbeat. The walls were lined with her canvas's rainstorms. Shadows, half-remembered faces. I could trace our history through each brushstroke. The color of my old coat in one corner, the shape of my hands hidden in another. Then I saw it. Our painting? The one we made during that storm 2 winters ago? The night she said, "Art is love when words fail." Except now. The man in the painting wasn't me. His posture was similar, tender, protective, but his face was a stranger's, and beneath it, the signature had changed. No longer the tiny initials we used to share in secret. It was hers, and his dot, Clara, and Adrian. I felt the world tilt. The chatter around me blurred into static. Champagne glasses clinked. Someone laughed. But all I could hear was the sound of rain, the ghost of that night returning to remind me that beauty can betray too. I stepped closer to the canvas, tracing the edge of the frame. My reflection glimmered faintly in the glass, overlapping the stranger's painted smile. For a moment, it looked like I was still part of the piece, until I realized I was just the shadow now, the forgotten original. Beautiful, isn't it? A woman beside me said. Adrian's influence really brought her work to life. Hey. I swallowed hard. Yeah, I managed. It's alive, all right. When she took the stage, the lights softened. Applause rolled through the room like gentle thunder. Clara smiled, poised, radiant, untouchable. I could still remember the way her lips used to quiver before every small performance. How, she'd whisper, "Tell me, I can do this." But tonight, she didn't need my reassurance. "Thank you all for coming," she began. Her voice, clear and steady, carried through the gallery. "This collection is a reflection of transformation, of finding new light in old storms." The audience leaned in. I held my breath. She glanced toward Adrian, the curator standing proudly in the front row, and smiled at him like he was the beginning of her story. "I owe everything to Adrian," she said. "He believed in my vision when no one else did. No one else." The words hit harder than any scream could. I felt the lilies in my hand begin to shake. My knuckles whitened around the stems, crushing the petals until the scent of death and sweetness filled the air. Not a single word about me. Not a mention of the nights spent painting in the dim light of our tiny apartment, or the way I used to hold her hand steady when she doubted herself. I wasn't even a ghost in her speech, just air. Erased, deliberately, beautifully. People clapped. Cameras flashed. And I realized she'd rewritten our story one stroke at a time, till I was nothing but background noise in her masterpiece. When our eyes finally met across the room, she froze. It lasted only a second, but in that second, everything cracked open. Her pupils widened, her breath faltered. I saw it, the flicker of guilt she tried to bury under applause. But she didn't look away because she was ashamed. She looked away because she was afraid I might still love her, and she would be right. Because love doesn't die where it should. It lingers in unfinished paintings, in the echo of promises. In the memory of hands that once held without demand. I left before the snow began to fall. The bouquet lay on the nearest table, wilted and half-crushed, quiet offering to a memory that no longer existed. Outside, the air was cold enough to sting. The city was a blur of light and motion, but I felt still like a painting abandoned mid-stroke. Behind me, the applause swelled again, muffled through the glass, sounding almost like rain. I walked until I couldn't hear it anymore. And with each step, I felt pieces of myself come undone, every promise. Every shared laugh, every small dream we once painted together by the time I reached the corner. The first snowflake landed on my coat, soft, indifferent, pure. That night, as the snow began to fall, everything I had built around her, the faith, the art, the love collapsed quietly into silence. But even silence remembers. And I knew, somehow, that she would too. Time has a strange way of folding itself when you're waiting for someone who's never coming back. Days blurred into the color of weak coffee and the sound of rain against windows I no longer opened. I stopped painting not because I ran out of ideas, but because every brushstroke still carried her shape. Every shade of blue reminded me of her laughter in the storm. Silence settled into my apartment like an uninvited guest. It slept beside me, ate with me, followed me from one empty morning to the next. I used to think silence was peaceful, but hers was different. Hers had weight. It pressed against my chest until I forgot what breathing used to feel like. I filled the hours with small rituals, the kind that pretend to be living. Coffee, work, long walks that ended nowhere. At night, I'd sit by the window with a sketchbook I never opened, tracing invisible lines on the paper with my finger. Sometimes, if the moonlight hit the page just right, I could almost see her there, laughing, painting, alive. Every December, when the city dressed itself in gold and frost, I'd find myself back at that old gallery, the one where she'd erased me. I told myself I was just passing by, but my feet always betrayed me. I'd stand across the street, hands buried in my pockets, watching people go in and out under the glittering lights. Her name was everywhere now. Clara Vin, the voice of modern melancholy. Her art had become a phenomenon. I saw her face on posters, on magazine covers, in the reflection of storefront glass. Always smiling, that same controlled, distant smile she used to wear when she was pretending not to hurt. People called her fearless. They didn't know how afraid she once was of disappearing. One night, curiosity betrayed me again. I stepped inside the gallery for the first time in years. The walls were white, cruelly white. and lined with her latest collection. Every piece was magnificent, precise, distant, but something was missing: the warmth, the imperfection. The storm, her colors had become quieter, softer, as if she'd learned to paint the silence she once ran from. There was one painting in particular, a small canvas tucked into the corner. A single figure, sitting by a window, staring out at a snow-covered city. His hands were still, his face blurred, but I knew it instantly. It was me. A note beneath it read, "Study in stillness." I stared at it for a long time, trying to decide if it was an apology or another performance. In the end, I realized it didn't matter. It was proof that I still existed somewhere inside her, even if only as art. I went home that night and found myself standing before my old easel. Dust covered it like memory. My brushes were stiff, the paint dried into brittle colors. Still, I sat down. For hours, I just stared at the blank canvas. Then I picked up the brush. Not to paint her, but to paint what she left behind. The first line trembled. The second steadied. By dawn, there was a figure not of her, not of me, but of something between us. A shadow with a heartbeat. It wasn't beautiful, but it was honest. The years passed quietly after that. I moved apartments, changed jobs, learned to eat alone without glancing at the empty chair across from me. Friends came and went, their voices filling the silence for a while, till it grew back stronger. And yet sometimes, she still visited me, not in person, but in dreams. I'd hear her voice calling my name from across a snowy street. I'd turn, heart racing, only to wake up to the gray ceiling of another ordinary morning. That's when I'd remember. She chose silence, and I had learned to live inside mine. But silence is never truly empty. It echoes. It holds the shape of the words we never said, the goodbyes we never gave. And though I told myself I'd moved on, each December carried her back to me, through the frost, through the wind. Through the faint memory of a woman painting rain beneath an awning, the world kept spinning, and her fame only grew. Yet in the stillness of my small, quiet life, I found something she'd lost. Peace, not forgiveness, not closure. Just the kind of still peace that settles after a storm has taken everything. One night, as snow began to fall again, I lit a candle and looked out the window. The flame flickered against the glass, and for the first time in years, I didn't see her reflection there, just mine. And I realized maybe that's what healing really is. Not forgetting. Just remembering without breaking. Still, I wondered, when she paints the next storm, will she think of me? Or has she finally learned to love the silence too? The candle burned low, whispering in the dark. Outside, the snow kept falling, quiet, endless, forgiving. The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning, folded neatly, sealed with gold, reeking faintly of pine and memory. It slipped through the mail slot like a ghost who'd found its way home. I knew before opening it that it was from her. The handwriting hadn't changed, elegant, deliberate, cruelly familiar. The same loops, the same quiet confidence in every curve of the ink. I ran my thumb across the envelope and felt time collapse into a single, unbearable moment. When I finally opened it, the words gleamed beneath the morning light. Clara and Adrian, December 24th. Wedding. On Christmas Eve, a day once sacred to us. My breath caught. It wasn't the words that hurt. It was the precision. How perfectly she had chosen that date, as if to bury me beneath snow and vows. For a long time, just stood there, the letter trembling in my hand. I almost threw it away. Almost, but there was something in me, a quiet, reckless whisper that said, maybe she wants you to see her happiness. Maybe she wants you to know she's free. Or maybe she wanted to know if I still bled, the night of the wedding. The city glittered under frost. Streetlights shimmered like gold dust scattered across the pavement. I walked through the cold, clutching nothing but silence. The invitation tucked inside my coat like a wound. The church stood at the end of the street, tall, white, immaculate. Inside, the air was thick with pine and candlelight. Every pew was lined with winter roses. The scent of them reminded me of her studio. It's the way she used to press flowers between pages of unfinished sketches. I slipped into the back row. No one noticed me, or maybe they did, and chose not to look. I was dressed in black, the wrong color for a wedding. It's a perfect one for mourning. And then I saw her, Clara. She stood at the altar, framed by soft light and falling petals. Her gown shimmered like new snow, flawless, untouchable. But her eyes hadn't changed. They still carried the same storm that used to haunt her dreams. She looked radiant, the kind of beauty that doesn't bloom from joy, but from endurance. The kind that peace or guilt can give. Her groom Adrian stood beside her, beaming. He looked at her the way I used to, like she was his masterpiece. Poor man. He didn't know that loving her meant learning how to live with unfinished paintings. The ceremony began. The priest spoke. Words about love, trust, eternity. The same words she once whispered into my skin when forever still meant something. My chest tightened. Each vow sounded like a version of the ones we once promised, rewritten, reframed, recycled into something that no longer belonged to me. When it came time for her to say, "I do," I swear the world paused. Her voice trembled for just a second, barely enough for anyone else to notice. But I did. I always did. I could still read the language of her hesitation. Her lips parted, and in that breath between words, I felt her remember. The studio, the rain, the way I used to whisper her name like it was a prayer. Then she said it. "I do," and the church erupted into applause. I didn't clap. I see OULDN single quotes. Instead, I looked at her the way a ghost looks at the living, not with envy, but with grief. And that's when she saw me. Her eyes found mine across the room, a collision in slow motion. For a heartbeat, everything else vanished. The music, the voices, the laughter, just us. Her bouquet trembled slightly in her hand. The color drained from her face. Her smile, that carefully constructed smile she'd worn for years, shattered. It was small, it's almost imperceptible, but I saw it. The flicker of regret. The silent question buried behind her eyes. Why did you come? I wanted to answer her with the truth, because I needed to see if love could die quietly. Because I needed proof that I was no longer hers. Because part of me still waited for her to call my name, but I didn't move. I just watched as she turned her face back to the crowd, lifting her chin, smiling again, too bright. It's forced, like nothing had cracked at all. The ceremony ended. Bells rang. People cheered, and I slipped out before anyone could see the way my hands were shaking. Outside, snow had begun to fall. Soft, delicate, endless. I stood beneath the cold sky, watching it cover the steps of the church like a blessing. Or maybe a burial in my pocket. The invitation burned against my palm. Clara and Adrian, December 24th. I traced the letters one last time, then tore the paper in half. The sound was sharp, final, beautiful. I didn't go there as a lover. I went as the ghost she buried, but walking away, I realized something cruelly simple. Even ghosts can bleed when it snows. And that night, as the church bells faded behind me, I finally understood what it meant to be forgotten by the person who once promised forever. The snow kept falling slow, silent, merciful. The wedding was over, but the night refused to end. The church bells had gone quiet, their echoes fading into the snow-heavy air. Guests lingered inside, laughter spilling out like warm light through stained glass. I stayed outside the shadow that didn't belong in her story anymore. Snow fell in soft waves, each flake dissolving against my coat before it could melt the ache inside me. I didn't know why I waited. Maybe I wanted one last glimpse. Or maybe I just couldn't make myself leave the place where I had finally been erased. Then the door opened. She stepped out, her gown brushing the snow like a whisper. The veil framed her face, catching stray flakes that glittered like tiny ghosts. For a moment she didn't see me, and I saw her the way the world did. Beautiful, radiant, untouchable. A woman who had everything. Then her eyes found mine. The air shifted. The space between us tightened into something familiar and unbearable. "You came," she said, her voice trembling, fragile as frost. "I did," I answered softly, "to say goodbye." A silence stretched between us. Not awkward, not angry, just full. The kind of silence that remembers everything words once destroyed. She looked at me the way she used to before, saying sorry, chin tilted down. Eyes glistening like she'd practiced holding tears but never learned how to release them. "I thought success would fill the void," she whispered, her breath turning to mist between us. "The galleries, the interviews, the applause, I thought they'd drown the part of me that missed you." Her hands trembled as she spoke. "But every applause just reminded me of you." Something cracked in her voice then, a sound that didn't belong to the confident woman she'd become. It was the sound of the girl I once held. The one who used to paint rainstorms because she didn't know how to survive sunshine. I wanted to tell her I understood, that I'd tried to fill my own void with silence, and it never worked either. But the words wouldn't come. Sometimes silence is kinder than truth, so I just looked at her. The snow gathering quietly at our feet. The world reduced to breath and memory. "I never meant to hurt you," she said finally. I didn't know how to love you without losing myself." And there it was, the truth she had owed me for years. But instead of anger, all I felt was peace. Because I finally understood, she had loved me in the only way she knew how, desperately. Imperfectly and not enough. Her gloved hand reached into her purse, and for a moment I thought she might hand me a letter. Instead, she pressed something into my palm. It was small, fragile, familiar. When I looked down, I saw it. The sketch. The one she'd drawn the day we met, beneath the awning in the rain. Me, holding the umbrella. Her, smiling at the storm. The paper was worn, corners soft from years of being unfolded and refolded. My breath caught. "I never forgot," she said, her voice breaking into a whisper, even when I pretended to. The snow began to fall harder, blurring her face into something almost wholly light and sorrow tangled together. I wanted to reach for her, to touch her one last time, but my hands stayed where they were, fists around the sketch like it was all I had left of us. Her husband's voice echoed from the church steps. "Clara." She turned instinctively, and for a moment I saw the conflict flicker in her eyes, guilt and longing dancing beneath the veil. "Go," I said quietly. "He's waiting." She nodded but didn't move. Her lips parted as if she wanted to say something else, something final. But maybe there was nothing left to say that wouldn't break us again. She looked at me one last time, a kind of look that felt like a memory taking its final breath, and then she walked away. Her figure blurred into the snowfall, white against white. Until she was gone, I stood there long after the door closed behind her, clutching the sketch in my hand. My fingers were numb, but the paper burned, soft, alive, unforgiving. On its back, faint pencil marks had faded with time, but one word still remained, barely visible beneath the smudge of rain and years. Forever. A promise she had once made beneath a gray sky and broken beneath a white one. I looked up. Snowflakes spun through the lamplight, falling without sound. The world was silent again, but not empty this time. Maybe that was her final gift, to leave me with something unfinished. Something honest, as I turned to leave. I tucked the sketch inside my coat, close to my heart. Not as a wound, but as proof that once for a fleeting season, love was real, and sometimes, that's enough. The church bells began to ring again, faint and distant, and for the first time in years I didn't look back. A year had passed since the wedding. 12 months of quiet mornings, empty nights, and the soft hum of a life that no longer belonged to anyone but me. Time had turned her name into a sound I no longer flinched at, but sometimes, when it rained, I still caught the echo of her voice in the droplets against glass. Winter had returned slower, gentler this time. The city was wrapped in white again, its edges blurred by snow and silence. I'd stopped visiting the old gallery months ago, stopped looking for her in newspaper articles and interviews. But fate, or something cruelly poetic, had a way of finding me when I least expected it. It happened on an ordinary afternoon. I was walking home from the cafe. Coat collar pulled up, sketchbook tucked under my arm. When I saw it, a poster taped to a fogged-up window. Local winter showcase, featuring works by Clara Venn. For a moment, the air left my lungs. Her name looked different now, smaller, humbler, stripped of the golden glow it used to carry. I stood there, staring, while snow gathered on my shoulders like hands urging me forward. I told myself I wouldn't go in, that I didn't need to, but my feet moved before my heart could argue. The gallery was small, the kind that smelled faintly of dust and pine wood. Paintings hung close together, their colors bleeding into one another like conversations overheard. The walls were quiet, not the glamorous kind of quiet that fame commands, but the kind that carries truth. And there it was, her painting, the same one we'd made together. Years ago, the storm, the umbrella, the two figures. But this time, the man's face was mine. Not imagined, not replaced. Me. I stepped closer, my reflection merging with the painted version of myself. The rain in the painting looked almost alive, the strokes loose, trembling, desperate. The woman beneath the umbrella was Clara, though older somehow, her expression softened by regret. Beneath the frame was a small card, handwritten, "For the man who taught me what love costs." Psst. The words hit harder than any apology could, not because they were grand or poetic, but because they were true. I didn't cry. Not this time. I just stood there, letting the snow drift through the open door behind me, melting into puddles on the gallery floor. The cold bit at my fingers, but I didn't move. I wanted to feel it, the ache, the release, the strange peace that follows understanding. Because love doesn't always end in hate. Sometimes it ends in memory, quiet, unfinished, eternal. I thought about her then. About the girl who painted rain because she couldn't trust the sun. About the woman who chased applause because silence scared her. About how, despite everything, she'd remembered me, not as a ghost, not as a wound, but as a lesson. Maybe that's what love becomes when it's done breaking you. Not forgiveness, not reconciliation, just acknowledgement. I slipped my hand into my coat pocket and felt the worn edges of the sketch. She'd given me the one from the day we met. The paper had aged, yellowed at the corners, but it was still there. Still whole? I pulled it out and looked at it under the gallery light. Two figures under a single umbrella, the same image that had followed us through every season of our lives. Only this version was smaller, messier, more human. I realized then that art, her art, our art, had always been a confession in disguise. Every painting was an apology she didn't know how to say. Every brushstroke was a letter addressed to the silence between us, and this one. This one was her final letter. I stayed until the lights dimmed, till the gallery attendant started turning the signs around. As I stepped outside, the snow fell thicker, the streetlight catching each flake like a promise not yet kept. For the first time in years, the cold didn't sting. It just felt honest. I walked home slowly, the sketch still in my pocket. The weight of it light now, no longer a relic of loss, but proof that something beautiful had once existed. Even if only for a while, some loves don't fade. They settle like paint that has finally dried after years of bleeding across the canvas. At the corner, I turned back one last time. Through the frosted glass, her painting glowed softly. Two silhouettes frozen beneath eternal rain, and for a moment, I swear I saw her standing there beside it, smiling, at peace. Finally letting go, I smiled too, because the sky, for the first time in years, didn't look so cold. It looked like forgiveness.